Hello. Happy day after 4th of July, but this is still actually my holiday day. We're off today celebrating Independence Day and reading British literature. Irony? Well, that goes along with Dickens, doesn't it? We have a lot of examples of irony. You might find your teachers are asking you to find those examples of irony in the story, and we do see a lot of it. So in chapter 16, it's called Sid. It's been so long. It's called Sid. It's called Sid. It's been so long since I've talked to you. How are you? And look, everybody's just hopping on. Hey, guys. You guys all must be from Discord because I said I'd be coming online. So we are on book 2, Still Knitting, which I think is such an interesting part of history. I don't know how realistic it is that you really could journal into knitting the history of the revolution, but I think it's a fascinating concept. I'm flipping through the book right now to see, because I know we've got 1984 coming after this. So I'm on page 158. Sid used to do this for me all the time. So it is till 3:45. We're on 158. It just takes me so long to get through anything. Maybe because I talk too much. Thanks, Frida. I appreciate it. Halfway through the book. Hey, Dinah. Guys, Dinah's in our Discord, but I found her Instagram the other day, and she really does a fabulous job of summarizing interesting books. Really good, insightful summaries that they capture the essence of the book. And I would recommend you find her on Instagram and if you want to follow her. But it's she reads a lot is her Instagram. And if I shouldn't put that out, Dinah, let me know. But I really am impressed with your Instagram, and I want to encourage other people because it's a great resource for readers to there's so many good books out there. And I like your synopsis of what you read. Frankenstein, Hazel, that is a fun story. I liked teaching Frankenstein. It was confusing. Remember, I used to teach kids with language processing disorders, dyslexia, that sort of thing. So the jumping around in the series, kind of like this book, jumping between Tale of Two Cities, France and England, that was hard for my students too. What about you guys? Is that a reading comprehension for you when the story's not told chronologically in order? And that's very much what Frankenstein's going to be. But I enjoyed the concept of who is the monster. Is it Dr. Frankenstein or is it the creature? And most of us get it wrong. We think Frankenstein is the monster. And the truth is Frankenstein is the creature that's created by Dr. Frankenstein. He started Macbeth instead of studying Scarlet because, sorry, I can't read without these, because too many English type books. I get it. Macbeth is my favorite Shakespeare that I've studied. So and that's fun, all the connections, right? Y'all, I just installed TikTok. It's not my generation. I don't quite get it. But there are a lot of book readers on TikTok too. I haven't explored it enough to see what book people do on TikTok. I know that's not really the forum, but my daughter convinced me I needed to have TikTok, so I've done it. Yes, Fareed, we really have an amazing group of people in our Discord and that follow along. Yeah, I so appreciate you guys. It gives me encouragement to think there's so many interesting, well-studied, polite, like we really don't get trolls. Knock on wood. I hope that now we don't attract trolls. But readers just generally tend to be interesting people that want to speak about ideas. So I love that we have our little community. And Sid, if you're still there, Discord is over 100 now, which shocks me because I'm always shocked. Now, our summer, oh my gosh, nobody's reading in the summer. Like, I normally have 8,000 that view in a 48 hour period of time, and we're under 1,000. in that period of time. I'm like, oh my gosh, are we losing all our readers? But I think kids just aren't reading in the summer, which is great. I mean, everybody needs a break, but hopefully it'll build again when school starts back up. And if it loses its interest, I'll just keep reading until I'm not reading anymore. So we'll see. Speaking of reading, let's see what the Defarges are up to. I told you, Farid, it's a great page. All right, still knitting. Madame Defarge and Monsieur, her husband, returned amicably to the bosom of Saint Antoine, while a speck in a blue cap toiled through the darkness and through the dust, and down the weary miles of avenues by the wayside, slowly tending towards that point of the compass where the chateau of Monsieur le Marquis, now in his grave, listened to the whispering trees. Such ample leisure had the stone faces now for listening to the trees and to the fountain, that the few village scarecrows who, in their quest for herbs to eat and fragments of dead stick to burn, strayed within sight of the great stone courtyard and terrace staircases, had it borne in upon their starved fancy that the expression of the faces was altered. There's going to be a lot of imagery of these stone faces, and think about what that imagery conjectures or what it creates you to think. You know, the gargoyle faces, they're a little hideous, they're unmoving, like when you talk about being set in stone. So you think about the nobility and how they were set in stone, that they were doing things, they didn't have the flexibility to change with the times. What is Dickens saying there with that stone imagery? Remember, when you're in AP or advanced, those are the kinds of things, observations that your teachers are looking for. So keep your mind open to when you see images that just keep recurring, repetition, metaphors, imagery, symbols. The author is trying to do something with those, trying to get an idea across in your mind without being like a preacher at you. A rumor just lived in the village, had a faint and bare existence there, as its people had, that when the knife struck home, the faces changed, from faces of pride to faces of anger and pain. Also, that when that dangling figure was hauled up 40 feet above the fountain, they changed again and bore a cruel look of being avenged, which they would henceforth bear forever. In the stone face over the great window of the bedchamber where the murder, which everybody recognized, no, where the murder was done, 2 fine dents were pointed out in the sculptured nose, which everybody recognized, and which nobody had seen of old. And on the scarce occasions when 2 or 3 ragged peasants emerged from the crowd to take a hurried peep at Monsieur the Marquis petrified, a skinny finger would not have pointed to it for a minute before they all started away among the moss and leaves, like the more fortunate hares, Hares, rabbits, who could find a living there. Chateau and hut, stone face and dangling figure. So remember, the dangling figure is the murderer, the father of the boy who was rolled over by the Marquis's chariot or carriage. And so we've got this, again, we talk about the paradoxes, the London, Paris, these dual parallels. So now we've got the dangling figure and the stone face, which are symbols for the peasants and for the aristocracy. Kelly, I survived yesterday. I'm so glad when you pop in. I miss you. So think about that duality of the stone and that dangling figure. And as mere human knowledge can split a ray of light and analyze the manner of its composition, so sublimer intelligences may read in the feeble shining of this earth of ours every thought and act, every vice and virtue of every responsible creature on it. The Defarges, husband and wife, came lumbering under the starlight in their public vehicle to that gate of Paris whereupon their journey naturally tended. There was the usual stoppage at the barrier guardhouse, and the usual lanterns came glancing forth for the usual examination and inquiry. Monsieur Defarge alighted, knowing 1 or 2 of the soldiery there and 1 of the police. The latter he was intimate with and affectionately embraced. When Saint Antoine had again enfolded the Defarges in his dusky wings, and they, having finally alighted near the saint's boundaries, were picked their way on foot through the black and awful of its streets, Madame Defarge spoke to her husband. Say then, friend, what is Jacques? of the police tell thee. I'm just seeing how long this section is. Oh, it's kind of long. Still knitting. They're still knitting for a long time. Let's see if we can get this done. Very little tonight, but all he knows. There is another spy commissioned for our quarter. There may be many more, for all that he can say, but he knows of one. Well, said Madame Defarge, raising her eyebrows with a cool business air, it is necessary to register him. How do they call that man? He is English. So much the better. His name? Barsad. Now remember, Barsad is a character we've run into before. He's going to be a minor character that has an ongoing impact on the story. He's one of those characters I always kind of lose track of. So just remember, it's Barsad, it looks like in English. Like you're in the bar, sad, Barsad. Said Defarge, making it French by pronunciation, Barsad. But he had been so careful to get it accurately that he then spelt it with perfect correctness. Barsad, repeated Madame. Good Christian name? John. Oh, good. Christian name? What's his first name? John. John Barsad, repeated Madame after murmuring at once to herself. Good. His appearance, is it known? Age, about 40 years. Height, she's like, what's he look like? Height, about 5'9", black hair, complexion dark, generally rather handsome visage, face. Eyes dark, face thin, long and sallow, nose aquiline, like long and slender, but not straight, having a peculiar inclination towards the left cheek, so it's got a little curve to it. Expression, therefore, too sinister. Well, that's a very detailed description. My faith, it is a portrait, said Madame, laughing. He shall be registered tomorrow. They turned into the wine shop, which was closed, for it was midnight, and where Madame Defarge immediately took her post at her desk, counted the small moneys that had been taken during her absence, examined the stock, went through the entries in every possible way, and finally dismissed him to bed. Then she turned out the contents of the bowl of money for the second time and began knotting them up in her handkerchief, in a chain of separate knots, for safekeeping through the night. All this while Defarge, with his pipe in his mouth, walked up and down, complacently admiring, but never interfering, in which condition, indeed, as to the business and his domestic affairs, he had walked up and down through life. The night was hot, and the shop, close shut, and surrounded by so foul a neighborhood, was ill-smelling. Monsieur Defarge's olfactory senses, like ability to smell, was by no means delicate, but the stock of wine smelt much stronger than it ever tasted, and so did the stock of rum and brandy and aniseed. He whiffed the compound of scents away as he put down his smoked-out pipe. You are fatigued, said Madame, rising her glance as she knotted the money. There are only the usual odors. I'm a little tired, the husband acknowledged. You are a little depressed, too, said Madame, whose quick eyes had never been so intent on the accounts, but they had had a ray or two for him. Oh, the men, the men. But my dear, began Defarge. But my dear, repeated Madame, nodding firmly. But my dear, you are faint of heart tonight, my dear. Well then, said Defarge, as if a thought were wrung out of his breast, it is a long time. It is a long time, repeated his wife. And when is it not a long time? Vengeance and retribution require a long time. It is the rule. So they're plotting revenge. Vengeance and retribution. This is a little bit of foreshadowing. It's telling us, it's giving us an insight without giving us all the details of the motivation of of Defarge and Madame Defarge and their reason for doing all that they're going to do in the future. At this point, we just have the hint that they are with the revolutionary side of history. It takes time. I lost my place. Here we go. It does not take a long time to strike a man with lightning, said Defarge. How long, demanded Madame composedly, does it take to make and store the lightning? Tell me. Defarge raised his head thoughtfully, as if there were something in that, too. It does not take a long time, said Madame, for an earthquake to swallow a town. Well, tell me how long it takes to prepare the earthquake. A long time, I suppose, said Defarge. But when it is ready, it takes place. and grinds to pieces everything before it. In the meantime, it is always preparing, though it is not seen or heard. That is your consolation. Keep it. She tied a knot with flashing eyes, as if it throttled a foe. I tell thee, said Madame, extending her right hand for emphasis, that although it is a long time on the road, it is on the road and coming. I tell thee it never retreats and never stops. I tell thee it is always advancing. Look around and consider the lives of all the world that we know. Consider the faces of all the world that we know. Consider the rage and discontent to which the Jacquerie addresses itself with more and more of certainty every hour. Can such things last? Bah, I mock you. So she's really feeding his anger. Like, it takes a long time for an earthquake, the plates in the earth to shift around. But then when the earthquake hits, it's destructive and it's instant. And then she's saying, we've got to remember that, like, we've got to keep moving forward. Everything, every step is a step forward. We have to hold true to what is this agenda we have. My brave wife, returned Defarge, standing before her with his hand. Let me try that whole sentence again. My brave wife, returned Defarge, standing before her with his head a little bent and his hands clasped at his back, like a docile and attentive student before his catechist. So docile is sweet-natured, easy, calm. I do question all this, but it has lasted a long time, and it is possible, my wife, it is possible that it may not come during our lives. Well, how then? Demanded Madame, tying another knot, as if there were another enemy strangled. Well, said Defarge, with a half-complaining and half-apologetic shrug, we shall not see the triumph. We shall have helped it, returned Madame, with her extended hand in strong action. Nothing that we do is done in vain. I believe with all my soul that we shall see the triumph. But even if not, even if I knew certainly not, show me the neck of an aristocrat and tyrant, and still I would. Then Madame, with her teeth set, tied a very terrible knot indeed. Oh, she's got some anger issues about the aristocracy. Rory, just popping in to say hi. She's not reading A Tale of Two Cities, but in Discord, yes, I saw you. Hope everyone's having a good day. Thank you. It's lovely out. It's not so hot in Louisiana. We had a big rainstorm just prior to this, and so it feels good. I'm in the screened-in porch, so the mosquitoes aren't getting me because they are alive and well in Louisiana. And I have a real issue with mosquitoes because my mother died of West Nile virus, a dang mosquito bite. So I really hate mosquitoes. I used to hate them because they were annoying, but Maniba, it's been a while since I've heard you shout out in the middle of a read. Good to hear from you. So Madame Defarge is a strong character, and we need to keep, it's important that we see how well Dickens builds these characters, because later in the story, as things happen, the foundation has been laid for us to believe that this woman was capable of this action. So, well, it was 2016, so I've learned to manage it, but I miss my mom still terribly, but the impact of that dang mosquito, I just always say damn mosquitoes, because, sorry if I'm offensive for that, because what a stupid way to die, that this one little bug bite takes your life away. Just a craziness. Madame enforced the conclusion of this piece of advice. Nope, I jumped ahead. Yes, but it is, nope, I'm still, her teeth are set. Hold, cried Defarge, like, hang on, reddening a little as if he felt charged with cowardice. I, too, my dear, will stop at nothing. Oh, don't brag like you're the brave one. I'll do whatever it takes, too. He might be on Discord. Sid, are you here? You're being called for. Sid, where are you? Yes, but it is your weakness that you sometimes need to see your victim and your opportunity to sustain you. Sustain yourself without that. When the time comes, let loose a tiger and a devil, but wait for the time with the tiger and the devil chained, not shown, yet always ready. She's like, you play your game too loose. You need to keep things hidden a little bit more. Madame enforced the conclusion of this piece of advice by striking her little counter with her chain of money as if she knocked its brains out, and then gathering the heavy handkerchief under her arm in a serene manner and observing that it was time to go to bed. Next noontide saw the admirable woman in her usual place in the wine shop, knitting away assiduously. A rose lay beside her, and if she now and then glanced at the flower, it was with no infraction of her usual preoccupied air. There were a few customers drinking or not drinking, standing or seated, sprinkled about. The day was very hot, and heaps of flies, who were extending their inquisitive and adventurous perquisitions into all the gluttonous little glasses near Madame, fell dead at the bottom. Their decease made no impression on the other flies out promenading, who looked at them in the coolest manner, as if they themselves were elephants or something as far removed, until they met the same fate. Curious to consider how heedless flies are. Perhaps they thought as much at court that sunny summer day. So again, he's painting a picture with these flies and them, some of them just dropping off dead, and the other flies not noticing what was going on around them until they too fell dead. Like they don't learn from each other, and he's making the comparison to humans also, that we don't see the signs. A figure entering at the door threw its shadow on Madame Defarge, which she felt to be a new one. She laid down her knitting and began to pin the rose in her headdress before she looked at the figure. It was curious. The moment Madame Defarge took up the rose, the customers ceased talking and began gradually to drop out of the wine shop. "Good day, madame," said the newcomer. "Good day, monsieur." She said it aloud, but added to herself as she resumed her knitting, "Ah, good day. Age about 40, height about 5 feet 9, black hair, generally rather handsome visage, complexion dark, eyes dark, thin, long, and shallow face, aquiline nose, but not straight, having a peculiar inclination towards the left cheek, which imparts a sinister expression. Barsad. Good day, one and all. Have the goodness to give me a little glass of old cognac and a mouthful of cool, fresh water, madame." Madame complied with a polite air. "Marvelous cognac, this, madame." It was the first time it had ever been so complimented, and Madame Defarge knew enough of its antecedents, things that came before it, to know better. She said, however, that the cognac was flattered and took up her knitting. The visitor watched her fingers for a few moments and took the opportunity of observing the place in general. Let's see what's happening. Camille, hi. It's good to see you back. I thought that was going to be Sid, and I don't know if y'all heard that beep. I should turn that off. I think that was probably my Discord. That means something's happened. Let's look on my phone and let's see. Yeah, I think so. "You knit with great skill, madame. I'm accustomed to it. A pretty pattern, too." "You think so?" said madame, looking at him with a smile. "Decidedly. May one ask what it is for?" "Pastime," said madame, looking at him with a smile, while her fingers moved nimbly. "Not for use?" "That depends. I may find a use for it one day. If I do, well," said madame, drawing a breath and nodding her head with a stern kind of coquetry, like flirtiness, "I'll use it." It was remarkable, but the taste of Saint Antoine seemed to be decidedly opposed to a rose on the headdress of Madame Defarge. So Saint Antoine is where they're from, and everybody has left is what it means. 24 minutes in. I doubt I'll get chapter 16 done in 30, but I want to finish 16. I like finishing on a full chapter. Two men had entered separately and had been about to order drinks when, catching sight of that novelty, they faltered, made a pretense of looking about as if for some friend who was not there, and went away. Nor of those who had been there when this visitor entered was there one left. They had all dropped off. The spy had kept his eyes open, but had been able to detect no sign. They had lounged away in a poverty-stricken, purposeless, accidental manner, quite natural and unimpeachable. "John," thought madame, checking off her work as her fingers knitted and her eyes looked at the stranger. Stay long enough, and I shall knit Barsad before you go. You have a husband, madame? I have. Children? No children. Business seems bad. Business is very bad. The people are so poor. Ah, the unfortunate, miserable people, so oppressed too, as you say. As you say, Madame retorted, correcting him, and deftly knitting an extra something into his name that boded him no good. Boded him like foretold. Pardon me, certainly it was I who said so, but you naturally think so, of course. I think, returned Madame in a high voice, I and my husband have enough to do to keep this wine shop open without thinking. All we think here is how to live. That is the subject we think about, and it gives us from morning to night enough to think about without embarrassing our heads concerning others. I think for others? No, no. The spy, who was there to pick up any crumbs he could find or make, did not allow this baffled state to express itself in his sinister face, but stood with an air of gossiping gallantry, leaning his elbow on Madame Defarge's little counter and occasionally sipping his cognac. A bad business, this, Madame, of Gaspard's execution. Ah, the poor Gaspard, with a sigh of a great compassion. My faith, returned Madame coolly and lightly, if people use knives for such purposes, they have to pay for it. He knew beforehand what the price of his luxury was. He has paid the price. So, Gaspard was the father of the boy who was run over by the carriage of the Marquis, and who ultimately murdered the Marquis. And as the other mender of roads said, he was executed. I believe, said the spy, dropping his soft voice to a tone that invited confidence and expressing an injured revolutionary susceptibility in every muscle of his wicked face, I believe there is much compassion and anger in this neighborhood touching the poor fellow between ourselves. Is there? Asked Madame vacantly. Is there not? Here is my husband, said Madame Defarge. As the keeper of the wine shop entered at the door, the spy saluted him by touching his hat and saying with an engaging smile, Good day, Jacques. Defarge stopped short and stared at him. Good day, Jacques, the spy repeated, with not quite so much confidence or quite so easy a smile under the stare. You deceive yourself, monsieur, returned the keeper of the wine shop. You mistake me for another. That is not my name. I am Ernest Defarge, so Barsad's trying to trick him. It is all the same, said the spy, airily, but discomfited too. Good day. Good day, answered Defarge, dryly. I was saying to Madame, with whom I had the pleasure of chatting when you entered, that they tell me there is, and no wonder, much sympathy and anger in Saint Antoine, touching the unhappy fate of poor Gaspard. No one has told me so, said Defarge, shaking his head. I know nothing of it. Having said it, he passed behind the little counter and stood with his hand on the back of his wife's chair, looking over that barrier at the person to whom they were both opposed, and whom either of them would have shot with greatest satisfaction. The spy, well used to his business, did not change his unconscious attitude, but drained his little glass of cognac, took a sip of fresh water, and asked for another glass of cognac. Madame Defarge poured it out for him, took to her knitting again, and hummed a little song over it. You seem to know this well, that is to say, better than I do, observed Defarge. Not at all, but I hope to know it better. I'm so profoundly interested in its miserable inhabitants. Ah, muttered Defarge. The pleasure of conversing with you, Monsieur Defarge, recalls to me. Sorry, I have a whole bunch of texts that I want to make sure nothing's. Looks like everything's okay. I always worry about my kids, you know? So if I see my phone with text messages, I need to check to see what's going on. All is well, alhamdulillah, Camille. I don't know if you're still there, but I just saw your question, so I was answering. The pleasure of conversing with you, Monsieur Defarge, reminds me, pursued the spy, that I have the honor of cherishing some interesting associations with your name. Indeed, said Defarge, with much indifference. Yes, indeed. When Dr. Manette was released, you, his old domestic, had the charge. Now, that's new information to us. His old domestic means Defarge worked for Dr. Manette. So there's that connection. We knew there was something, but I don't think we've ever been told specifically that he had been a servant of Dr. Manette. Yes, indeed. When Dr. Manette was released, you, his old domestic, had the charge of him, I know. He was delivered to you. You see, I'm informed of the circumstances. Such is the fact, certainly, said Defarge. He had had it conveyed to him in an accidental touch of his wife's elbow as she knitted and warbled that he would do best to answer, but always with brevity. It was to you, said the spy, that his daughter came, and it was from your care that his daughter took him, accompanied by a neat brown monsieur. How was he called? In a little wig? Lorry of the Bank of Tellson and Company over to England? Such is the fact, repeated Defarge. Very interesting remembrances, said the spy. I have known Dr. Manette and his daughter in England. Yes, said Defarge. You don't hear much about them now, said the spy. No, said Defarge. In effect, Madame struck in, looking up from her work and her little song, we never hear about them. We receive the news of their safe arrival, and perhaps another letter, or perhaps two, but since then they have gradually taken their road in life, we ours, and we have no correspondence. Perfectly so, Madame, replied the spy. She's going to be married. Going? Echoed the Madame. She was pretty enough to have been married long ago. You English are cold, it seems to me. Oh, she's saying she's going in the future to be married? I'm shocked. She was such a pretty thing. I think she would have been married before now. Um, oh, you know I'm English. I perceive your tongue is, returned Madame. And what the tongue is, I suppose the man is. Like the way you speak, I get it. You are English, Dinah. I know that Defarge was a former employee of the doctor, but I think I found that out when I was trying to make a character map. I had to stop because, oh, that is the problem with character maps. Like, you're trying to map them out so you can know who they are. And I try to do that just based on what I like, writing them as I meet them, just give myself some little remembrances of them. But you're right, that might have been an overlap. I don't remember them saying it before, but they might have. Or not they, but the story might have. Oh, so he did not take the identification as a compliment, but he made the best of it and turned it off with a laugh. After sipping his cognac to the end, he added, yes, Miss Manette is going to be married, but not to an Englishman, to one who, like yourself, is French by birth. And speaking of Gaspard, poor Gaspard, it was cruel, cruel. It is a curious thing that she's going to marry the nephew of Monsieur the Marquis, for whom Gaspard was exalted to that height of so many feet. In other words, the present Marquis. So something has happened since we read. We didn't know that she was engaged. When we last read, we knew all these suitors wanted her. And we knew that Darnay had asked Dr. Manette to support him in his cause for Lucy, but we didn't know that they were actually engaged. So we're being told that here. But he lives unknown in England. He is no Marquis there. He is Mr. Charles Darnay. D'Aulnay is the name of his mother's family. Madame Defarge knitted steadily, but the intelligence had a palpable effect upon her husband, like noticeable. Do what he would behind the little counter as to the striking of a light and the lighting of his pipe, he was troubled, and his hand was not trustworthy. This is exactly what Madame Defarge had warned him against. You show your cards too easily. Oh, Dinah, well, that's good. I'm telling you, you do need, I mean, I've read this. This is my third time to read Tale of Two Cities. And you saw me at the beginning. I still get so confused with all the characters. Kind of like Darnay. I hope he's a trustworthy character. So until this time around, I thought Sidney Carton married Lucy. And so I was really confused at the beginning. And then I realized as I paid closer attention this time, no. It's Darnay, who is the nephew of the Marquis. And then it all begins to make sense. But I'm just always switching Carton and Darnay in my mind. And I like Darnay too, without giving away any spoilers. I like Darnay too. What we've seen about him so far turns out to be accurate. He's a good guy. But I like Sidney too. Sidney just, I think, is a product of his society where if you have fallen and if you are a fallen man, if you can't live this pious life, then you have no value. And I think many cultures still believe that. And I just personally don't believe that. I think every human life has value. what we do with that life based on our own traumas and our own opinions of ourselves is the important thing. And Sydney Carton and Charles Darnay are both going to be very interesting. Remember, they're parallels, they're foils of each other. So he's kind of playing his hand badly. He's giving away that he's shaken by this news. The spy would have been no spy if he had failed to see it or to record it in his mind. Having made at least this one hit, whatever it might prove to be worth, and no customers coming in to help him to any other, Mr. Barsad paid for what he had drunk, took his leave, taking occasion to say in a genteel manner before he departed that he looked forward to the pleasure of seeing Monsieur and Madame Defarge again. For some minutes after he had emerged into the outer presence of Saint Antoine, the husband and wife remained exactly as he had left them, lest he should come back. Can it be true? Said Defarge in a low voice, looking back at his wife as he stood smoking with his hand on the back of her chair. What he has said of Mademoiselle Manette? As he has said it, returned Madame, lifting her eyebrows a little. It is probably false, but it may be true. Like he's such a liar, it's probably not true, but it's possible. If it is, Defarge began and stopped. If it is, repeated his wife, and if it does come, while we live to see it triumph, I hope, for her sake, Destiny will keep her husband out of France. Big line there. I hope for her sake, Destiny will keep Darnay out of France. And if it does come, no, her husband's Destiny, said Madame Defarge with her usual composure, will take him where he is to go, and will lead him to the end that it is to end him. That is all I know. But it is very strange, now at least. Is it not very strange? Said Defarge, rather pleading with his wife to induce her to admit that after all her sympathy for Monsieur, her father, and herself, her husband's name should be proscribed under your hand at this moment by the side of that infernal dog who has just left us. Stranger things than that will happen when it does come, answered Madame. I have them both here of a certainty, and they are both here for their merit, and that is enough. He's like, look at the irony of the fact that Darnay, the Marquis, they really hate the Marquis. The Marquis is a hated character. I'm not giving any spoilers here. We've established that he's a hated character in Saint Antoine. But the irony is that Defarges were connected to Manette, and the Manettes were not connected to Darnay prior to this. Now, after they've released Manette to go back to England, Lucy, the daughter of the former employer of Defarge, is to marry this blood relative of nobility that they despise, that they're sworn to get revenge against. Now, we don't know why. There's a really dark secret that's not going to be told until much later in the book. This dark secret is driving everything. And so there's this irony of what were the chances of them connecting and then falling in love and marrying. So again, irony, Dickens and his irony. She rolled up her knitting when she had said those words, and presently took the rose out of the handkerchief that was wound about her head. Either Saint Antoine had an instinctive sense that the objectionable decoration was gone, or Saint Antoine was on the watch for its disappearance. Howbeit, whichever way, the saint took courage to lounge in very shortly afterwards, and the wine shop recovered its habitual aspect. So they knew now that Barsad the spy was gone, and they all returned to their hangout. In the evening, at which season of all others Saint Antoine turns himself inside out, and sat on doorsteps and window ledges, and came to the corners of vile streets and courts for a breath of air, Madame Defarge, with her work in her hand, was accustomed to pass from place to place and from group to group. A missionary, there were many like her, such as the world will do well never to breed again. All the women knitted. They knitted worthless things, but the mechanical work was a mechanical substitute for eating and drinking. The hands, so they're hungry, they don't have anything else to do with their hands, they can't eat with their hands, so it's good to knit, it keeps them busy. If the bony fingers had been still, the stomachs would have been more famine-pinched. But as the fingers went, the eyes went, and the thoughts. And as Madame Defarge moved on from group to group, All three went quicker and fiercer among every little knot of women that she had spoken with and left behind. Her husband smoked at his door, looking after her with admiration. A great woman, he said. Strong woman, a grand woman, a frightfully grand woman. Darkness closed around, and then came the ringing of church bells and the distant beating of the military drums in the palace courtyard as the women sat knitting. Darkness encompassed them. Another darkness was closing in as surely another darkness, like there's that symbol of, death and gloom and despair. Another darkness was closing in as surely when the church bells, then ringing pleasantly in many an airy steeple over France, should be melted into thunder cannon, when the military drum should be beating to drown a wretched voice, that night all potent, all powerful, as the voice of power and plenty, freedom and life. So much was closing in about the women who sat knitting, that they, this sentence is, that they, their very selves, were closing in round a structure yet unbuilt, where they were to sit, knitting, counting, dropping pens. Lots was revealed in that chapter. I don't know if you picked it up. It is, Dinah. It is a good chapter. That's just what I was saying. Let's see if we have, I think I did all the vocabulary. Let's see, we're in chapter 16. Let's see, chapter 16. Although I'm at 41 minutes, so I may save that 14, 15, and 16. Let's see if there's anything important. What account of the fate of Gaspard is given to Defarge and the other Jacquerie by the mender of roads? That's Gaspard was the father, that son was killed, and he is, he's relaying the information that Gaspard was tortured and put to death. He was quartered. And Vanessa says, hello, great to see you live. You too. I want to say thank you for helping me get through my college English class, A Lesson Before Dying. Ooh, that's been maybe 2 years ago. I really love that story. I've been asked, I'm going to do a live read, guys, for those of you that are still here. And I'm put in my community section to drop in questions, because maybe y'all don't have any questions, but like if you're potential teachers, if you are literary students, if you have questions about reading, if you're an English second language student, if you have any homework questions, we can do that live. Ask your questions. If you have questions about me, my travels, my crazy big family, what led me to teaching, what led me to leave teaching, what books I like to read, what books I don't like to read, put those questions into the community questions portion of the post, or join me on Discord and put them there. And then I think later in the week, I'll do a live vlog reading instead of a reading. Well, it's not a reading at all, a live vlog where I answer those questions. So Vanessa, if you can't make it, maybe drop the questions in if you have any about A Lesson Before Dying. If you're taking literature at the university level, that's either one of your prerequisites, or you're a humanities major that might be interested in teaching or being an English teacher, something like that. Oh, Camille, hey. Yeah, ask away if you want to know about my 5 kids, my 1 grandchild, my mother dying from West Nile disease. She was the only woman in Louisiana that year, only person in Louisiana that year to die of West Nile. It's just weird. I've just got a weird personality, like interesting fact. And I'm not exactly what I think I appear. So, maybe you have preconceived ideas of me. I will avoid politics and I will avoid religion, because I think those are very personal things. And I don't want to be that vulnerable with people I don't know to talk about what my political belief systems are or my religious belief systems are. But if you've been reading with me long enough, you probably have a good sense of what those are. I love when you guys hop in. I was just going over the questions. Who are doomed to destruction by the revolutionary group that uses the name Jacques? Why? The nobility. The nobility is really developing here. I'm making sure I didn't miss any. My eyesight is just getting worse and worse. And so even these glasses, sometimes I can't focus. Who's come to spy? Now, this is all just questions about plot. So remember, teachers are going to ask you those plot questions, those character questions. Then he or she are going to dig into literary devices. And that's probably how you should think too. Learn the story, understand what's going on, make sure you're not lost and confused, do some comprehension checks, and then dig deeper into the literary devices, characterization, that sort of thing. And that's how this is structured. The next section is character questions. The Defarges are both bitter revolutionaries, but they differ in many ways. How did the two Defarges differ in their attitude toward the coming revolution and their patience in waiting to see it come? Madame Defarge is slow and steady with her revenge, and Monsieur Defarge wants his revenge. He's very passionate about it. Social and historical setting, that's good to know the context. That's such an important part of reading comprehension. There are a number of indications of the injustice and cruelty of the times, of the oppression of the poor and the weak. Dickens portrays the root causes of the revolution to come. How did the treatment of Gaspar show unusual cruelty on the part of the authorities? Oh, that was a brutal execution when he's quartered and they said part of him, like he'd been torn to bits, but he still wasn't dead yet. I mean, just really abusive, cruel torture. Why did the peasants shout, "Long live the king," if they're so oppressed? We talked about this some. They're caught up in the moment. They're like sheep, easily led. They're looking for their own selfish interests. And then we go into literary devices. The revolutionary group in the wine shop, the Jacquerie, used secret signals for various purposes. What is the significance of Jacques and the rose? Jacques is the password, and the rose in the hair signals danger. So I thought we had kind of figured that out, but I like that it's out there explicit. Here's one about the stone faces. Why does Dickens again bring in the stone faces at the chateau? Let's hear what the experts say. This is a reminder of the brutality. Think about being stone-faced. Brutality of the Marquis, a symbol of the rigidity, and we talked about that inflexibility of the authorities at the time, and a chance for some fine writing. One of the faces resembles that of the murdered Marquis. And we've got words, sallow. I don't want to take more time, so I'm just going to read the words and then I'll answer them I'll give the answers in the context below. So sallow, the four choices are rosy yellow. Oh, I just blew that. Rosy red, unhealthily yellow, showing pain, puffed from exhaustion. So sallow, Paul's complexion looks sallow from too much study indoors. A, rosy red. B, unhealthily yellow. C, showing pain. D, puffed from exhaustion. 2, decried. The hikers decried a hawk wheeling and gliding far above the lonely valley. A, visited. B, called to. C, observed. D, overlooked. Inaudible. Traffic noises were inaudible inside the soundproof television studio. Inaudible. Invisible. A. B. Not able to be recorded. C. Not able to be heard. D. Unusually loud and boisterous. Kelly, I love that you're playing along. I'm going to post the answers at the end, like on when I post this, although it takes like 24 hours to for the live reads to show up, I think. Infallible. The judgment of no one man, even the president, is infallible. A, unfailing. B, insecure. C, apparent. D, cherished. The judgment of no one man, even the president, is infallible. 5, indispensable. Those who find bodily comfort indispensable should not plan long hiking trips. A, desirable. B, lively. C, insupportable. D, essential. Now, I'm going to pause and talk about tests, like SAT tests. Sometimes I don't like the definition that's used when they're really brief like this. And when you get onto an ACT test, you're like, if you don't know the word, you're trying to extract the meaning from the context. And sometimes the answer they give that is correct doesn't feel like the right answer. This is an example of one of those. Indispensable is, I would say indispensable means not, to not be able to be done without, right? So the word that they're using here doesn't substitute well. Those who find bodily comfort indispensable should not plan long hiking trips. And all that negative, the double negatives, it's confusing too. Insolent. The insolent manner of the child showed a basic hostility. Courteous, A. B. Offensive. C. Sleepy. D. Physically violent. The insolent manner of the child showed a basic hostility. Retribution. Hamlet considered the death of Claudius just retribution for the crimes Claudius himself had committed. Now, that should be a context clue, but if you don't know the story of Hamlet, it's not as easy. Hamlet considered the death of Claudius just retribution for the crimes Claudius himself had committed. Not just retribution, but fair retribution. Repayment. B. Legal action. C. Excitement. D. Analysis. Docile. Defarge, no, I don't want to read that one. Before the ride, Marcia's horse seemed docile enough, but once mounted, he was almost unmanageable. A. Wild. B. Quietly obedient. C. Vigorously active. D. Intelligently alert. So docile. Assiduously. This is number 9. Assiduously. By applying himself assiduously, Jerry was able to raise his grade from a C to an A. Off and on, A. Persistently, B. C. Shyly. D. Cleverly. And finally, habitual. The lad had to forgo his habitual practice of taking a midnight snack because the refrigerator was empty. A. Colorful. B. Gloomy. C. Lively. D. Customary. So those are our words. I hope you guys are building your vocabulary with these activities. And I will put the answers in the description below, as YouTubers always say. As I said, in the summer, we're not getting a lot of viewers and we're not getting a lot of new subscribers. If any of you are left, which I doubt, from India, because it's so late at night for you in India, I'm just encouraging you to share this channel with your other student friends and your other readers, because that will help us grow, because India has such a large population. And sadly, you guys are still we're still on some lockdown here. But this might give people things to do. Those that are older and like books, if you know people that are like in a adult living facility, then they might enjoy the books. Let them know about it. Let's get some more subscribers growing and keep growing. Those of you that have become my friends, I so appreciate you. And I really love when you come on and give me some encouragement, because there are days I just don't want. I've been very open and forthcoming about the fact that I struggle with depression. And I think it's important to have support systems. This is something I love to do, so I keep doing it, and I enjoy it more because of all the sweet interactions from you guys. So if you have not subscribed, consider doing that. If you join Discord, I really try to be faithful about saying I'm going to go do a live read, because otherwise you'll never know when I'm going to do a live read. I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. And I will read to you next time. See ya.